Okay, so I think we should probably make a start. Hello and welcome to our ninth webinar. My name's Judith Thornton. I lead the Knowledge Exchange work package within Biomass Connect, and I'm based at Aberystwyth University. So this is the first of our season 3 of webinars. As you know, during the summer, we've focused on live events on site, and then we have this series of winter webinars. And over the last couple of seasons, we've spent some time looking at various biomass crops. So obviously we looked at willow, miscanthus, eucalyptus, reed canary grass, black locust, and we've looked at energy canes as well. Today we're going to be looking at poplar and hemp. So anyone who's been to one of these webinars before knows the drill. So before we jump into the talks, quick plug for the Biomass Connect project, which I'm guessing most of you know about. So there's a great website which includes news on events and general happenings in the industry. There's technical articles on there, there's fact sheets and information about the various different crops. So you can, all of your biomass knowledge needs, you can start from the Biomass Connect website. So then, and then obviously one of our other key activities is doing these webinars. And today's webinar, as I say, is on poplar and hemp. And the webinar is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel after the event. And yeah, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you do social medias, please subscribe to our social media content as well. So we've got two speakers today, Jamie Bartley and Pietro Alasia. And Jamie's going to speak to us about hemp and Pietro's going to speak to us about poplar. So brief introduction to Jamie. Jamie co-chairs the Cannabis Industry Council and is on the all-party parliamentary group that UK government has on hemp and cannabis and medicinals. He's also part of the Centre for High Carbon Capture Cropping, which is a NIAB-led project, which is looking at various biomass crops. His main sort of focus really is on growing the industry and looking at some of the end uses, so what those materials can get used for. So, Jamie, over to you.
Thanks, Judith, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. So as Judith said, I'm Jamie Bartley and I'm the CEO and founder of the Unite Group. I'll give you a little bit of a background to who we are, and then we'll go into some more detail around industrial hemp and some of the agronomy around it and some of the potential benefits as well. So who we are, what we're about, we're really looking to create regenerative ecosystems, and that's to accelerate the decarbonisation and improve human and planetary health. So these are 3 different ecosystems that we're looking to develop within the Unite Group, and they really coexist to support each other and to help us take visionary people and create those regenerative ecosystems to heal the planet. So within the Unite knowledge ecosystem, we undertake lots of researching, testing, informing and training to support that transition to regenerative solutions. That's across quite a lot of different sectors as well, both from an agricultural perspective, from a hemp perspective. We do a lot around carbon credits and decarbonisation, and we do a lot around retrofit and renewable power generation as well. And then our Unite Solutions ecosystem, that's where we actually deliver a lot of these regenerative solutions that we've learning and developing through the knowledge system. And then the Unite Hemp ecosystem, we're very much looking to scale hemp as a bio-based solution for multiple different industries, specifically focused on construction and the built environment at the moment, but also we've got a lot of early stage work going on around multiple different end uses, which we'll go into more detail shortly. We formed the group in 2018. That was the original branding. You can see there we're actually just going for a brand transition, hence the 2 different logos. In 2019, we started undertaking our first hemp trials. That involved us growing 240 acres each year, and that was multiple different cultivars. We actually grew 5 different cultivars in the first year, 7 on the second year, and we grew those at 8 different seed densities as well. And that was over the 3 years, and it really allowed us to fully understand how all those variables impacted on the yield of the different components of the plant that we were looking to valorise. And then off the back of that research, we were awarded or part of an award for an Innovate UK and DEFRA funded research project, which was 5.9 million total, which Judith mentioned. That's the Centre for High Carbon Capture Cropping. I'll go into a bit more detail a bit later on in the presentation. And then in 2023, we established Unite Academy, which I touched on earlier, which sits in our knowledge ecosystem. And that's really to disseminate the information and the data and the learning that we've done, and also bring people into the sector so people can diversify and ultimately accelerate the workforce. So this is a little video around hemp, and it will just cover off some of the details and why we're so focused on it.
We don't need any pesticides, insecticides, or even fertilizers on most soils, just sunshine and natural rainfall, which is great for biodiversity, bees, and our pollinators. In its 4-month growth cycle, it will grow up to 4 meters in height, which means all the biomass sequesters huge amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. Up to 20 tons of CO2 is sequestered per hectare cultivated. Hemp produces 4 times the biomass that forestry would in its 4-month growth period. It can also boost following cereal crop yields by 16 to 18% in a crop rotation. So in August, the harvest commences. It is a very robust crop, so requires specialist equipment. Once harvested, we then leave the straw to rot in the fields. This process breaks down the lignin, which is a natural glue that binds the outer bast fibre to the woodier inner core, the sheave. Then the straw is baled and transported to be processed. The primary process is decortication, which separates the bast fibre from the sheaves. The fibre is then further processed into non-woven insulation rolls and bats. The sheaves are combined with lime to form hempcrete blocks, which can be used for new build and retrofit. Both products are 100% natural, perform well acoustically and thermally, but also allow for breathability. This breathability ensures moisture and mold do not build up inside the properties. All the products are carbon negative and planet positive at the point of installation. But you can do so much more with hemp as well.
The thing we're very focused on as well is that sort of whole life impact assessment on any product. So right from the seed right the way through to the end use and dispose of that product at the end of its life use. We really ensure to account all of those pieces and try and make it as circular as possible in any of the different products that we're developing.
So hopefully that has given you a deeper understanding of why we at Unite are looking to build a regenerative ecosystem around hemp.
Okay, so this is some of the different variables around cultivation and harvest. Ultimately, in a lot of the projects we look at, we start at the end use. We say to people, look at the end use, because that dictates all the other variables previously to that end use. So there's 2 options really for cultivating hemp. There's cultivating hemp for hemp seed, which is usually it's a lower crop, but again I'll go into some of those variables once we go through this bit in a minute. And then we've got fibre end uses as well. So both of them get drilled at the same time, mid-April to early May. Soil needs to be above 8 degrees consistently for hemp to germinate. Seed densities is one of the big variables between the 2 end uses. So if we're growing for seed, it's generally 25 to 35 kilograms per hectare of seed. Drill it, and if we're drilling for fibre, it's up 60 to 80 kilos a hectare. So quite a difference in the plant density there. Seed depth is usually about 1.5 centimetres, and ideally you roll the seed once it's been drilled, and then in the ideal world we get a little bit of rain on it not long after it as well. One of the big differences between the 2 varieties, or the 2 sort of end uses, is seed varieties generally tend up to be about 1.5 to 2 meters tall maximum, whereas the fibre varieties generally be about 3.5 to 4 meters tall. So your harvest systems will vary as well. For seed, traditional combine harvesters are used, or stripper headers are used as well. Take the seed off and then clean the biomass from the seed, and then obviously dry the seed down. Then it goes on for further processing into hemp seed oil and protein powder. Hemp seed oil is a really nutritious oil. It's got the perfect balance of omega-3, 6 and 9 and all the essential amino acids. So compared to any other seed oil we can cultivate in the UK, it's far more nutritious for human consumption. And you get protein powder, which is very sustainable production of protein as well. The harvest systems we use for the fibre crops is generally it's either a tail-mounted hydraulic knife set, so 3 or 4 knives depending on the height of the crop, which would chop the crop down into about a 60 or 90 centimetre length, which then would get retted on the fields. And then once that retting process is finished, 2 to 3 weeks, we'd then look to get that baled. The other option is you can use a forage harvester. We've had success where you take all of the knives out of the throat apart from one, and then remove the belly plate from the base of the forage harvester, and that will go through. It's got a maize header on as well, and then that will go through and leave a swath of hemp with a similar sort of chop length as the knives would, which you can then turn with a tedder and then bale once you got to the right level of retting. Ideally for processing hemp, you want to be baling at less than 15% moisture, but in the fields, in a swath, it does generally dry quite quickly, depending on what the conditions are as well. So this little bit, just to give you a bit more information on the CHCX3 project, which is what we've shortened it to. It's quite a mouthful saying the Centre for High Carbon Capture Cropping all the time. So as mentioned, it's a 4-year project, just under 6 million. It's a multi-partner project. We're going to see some of the partners in a minute. And it's really geared up to help UK farmers capture more carbon, build farm resilience through diversified cropping. So it's going to enable insetting and offsetting of the emissions and to offer new revenue sources via the voluntary carbon markets for farmers. We're also looking to support enhanced value chains for industries such as textiles or construction using the biorenewables. So that's really looking at downstream valorisation of these different crops as well. And within the project, we've got 4 different crop types. So we've got annual fibre crops, which we're leading the work package on, looking at hemp and flax. There's perennial food and feed and forage work package. There's a perennial biomass crops work package, generally looking at willow and miscanthus. And there's a rotational cover crops work package as well. Then linking those, we've got some genetic crop improvement work packages been undertaken by York University. We also have a knowledge hub, which is disseminating all the information that's generated through the research. And we've got a couple of other work packages looking specifically on soil carbon and then value chains and life cycle analysis for different products as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit more of a context of the work that's been undertaken. We're in year 2 of 4 of that project, so it's our 2nd year cultivation season, certainly for the fibre crops anyway. And there you can just see an example of some of the different crops, and it's really just trying to look at what the benefits environmentally potentially are, but also how we can improve tillage systems. So as an example, the one on the right, there's a perennial wheat, which is having some quite interesting results. But we're also looking at sort of the soil health function as well as the carbon elements within the project. As I said, it's funded by DEFRA under the Future Farming's R&D fund, which is climate smart farming, and it's been facilitated by Innovate UK on behalf of UKRI. There you can see that the project partners are involved in it. You probably know some of them potentially from your industries as well. But yeah, it's been a really successful project, and looking forward to disseminating the results as they get put together over the next couple of years. Okay, and that's it. As Judith said, I think we're going to go for questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll hand back to Judith now. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. That's a great introduction to hemp and your organisation, and also to Centre for High Carbon Cropping. So we decided yesterday that what we actually do in this webinar is to have both presentations and then have the Q&A at the end as sort of more of a bit of a panel discussion. So we'd like to move on. So this so I don't know how familiar you guys are with painting, but Van Gogh and Monet feature lots of poplar paintings. There's obviously lots of poplar planted, so it's clearly got a big long history, and has been, you know, the sort of the focus of some nice paintings in earlier years. But now obviously it's planted as a short and medium rotation forestry crop across Europe. And I'm delighted to be joined by Pietro Alasia, of AL wood. So Pietro, together with his father, run AL wood based out of Italy. So they breed and multiply poplar varieties, and they then sell them across Europe. And Pietro was actually in the UK last week for the Biomass Connect showcase event, which I'm sure some of you were also at. So what does that poplar then get used for? I've been reliably informed that some poplar actually ends up as packaging for camembert cheese. So I've learnt that today. Pietro, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. My name is Pietro Alasia, and I am responsible for managing customer relationships at Alwood, both international and international markets. So we produce nursery material for traditional poplar cultivation and stakes for biomass plantations. As the fourth generation of our family business, we have evolved from selling our plants locally to supply nursery material for plantation across Europe. And it has been 10 years since we started working with the UK. Currently, we produce approximately 1 million plants annually, cultivated on 100 hectares with the support of 25 full-time employees, primarily consisting of workers and agronomists. In addition to providing material for plantation establishment, we also offer on-site technical consultancy to ensure the proper development of this plantation. I think that now we will have a short video regarding our nursery. Here's how poplar are in the nursery. And now, moving on research and development, since the 1980s, we have initiated a genetic improvement program for poplar species, focusing on creating new hybrids that can withstand current biotic and abiotic challenges. Our research begins with the collection of germplasm from natural stands, parental lines of the Populus species, gathered from various locations in the Northern Hemisphere. Here, for example, from the United States of America with Populus deltoides in green, from the foothills of the Himalayas with Populus ciliata in black. We have then established a populatum in the northwestern Italy, where the continental climate characterized by harsh winters and hot summers allows us to cultivate a diverse range of materials for controlled crossing in the lab. So, unlike major annual crops such as cereals, poplar research is a lengthy process. Successful clones that are available in the market today were developed over a span of 20 years, actually. Today, I would like to introduce you the first cultivation model called short rotation forestry, SRF, using cuttings that are only 22 centimeters in length. The cycle lasts 3 to 4 years, allowing us to achieve up to 6 cycles from a single planting, as the roots remain in the ground to grow new shoots after the harvest. The primary product from this plantation is wood chips, which are used in energy plants. The biomass production in this case is about 15 to 20 tons per hectare annually, with a planting density of around 6,600 units per hectare, as you can see from the photo. Harvesting can be conducted in 2 different ways. The first one, which is shown by the photo, directly with a propelled harvester, or in 2 different phases by cutting and then chipping at the factory. So today, approximately 20% of our biomass clones are used for SRF, while the 80% are used for medium rotation forestry, MRF, which, as we will see, ensures a higher material yield, although the SRF segment has been growing rapidly in the last 2 years. Medium rotation forestry is the most commonly used cultivation model in Europe for poplar biomass plantation. In this case, the nursery material is 1.75 meters long with a planting density of 1,600 units per hectare. This results in an annual biomass yield of 20 to 25 tons per hectare over a production cycle of 5 to 7 years. Similar to the SRF, we can achieve 3 to 4 cycles without replanting. But, as we will see later on with the MRF, we can ensure as well several products rather than just wood chips production. Now talking about some key agronomic features. The first one, some practices for maintaining the plantation include discarrowing to control weeds and, more importantly, to aerate the soil, allowing the plants to absorb the significant amounts of CO2 that poplars can capture. Another critical practice is correcting the top growth after initial vegetation to ensure proper plant development, leading to increased biomass production, as we can clearly see from the photo. Here we have an example of medium rotation forestry established in Poland with clones AF34 and AF18. The productivity has been 30 cubic meter per hectare each year. That can be translated in 20 to 22 ton hectare per year. And then moving on, I think we have a photo of that plantation. As you can see, half of that has been cut, harvested, and now, knowing that it was springtime, poplars are resprouting from the roots. In conclusion, regarding the variety that are used today for poplar short and medium rotation forestry, the AF34 clone is currently the most widely planted poplar in Europe, thanks to its excellent resistance to diseases, wind, and its high crop growth rate production. Here there's a look on grants about Italy, which is, of course, the country I know the most. Here the funding source is for traditional poplar plantation, so with the aim of plywood production. It's a bit different rather than biomass, but as we can see, the money in this case come from the EU, and then they are administered by the local authority, so Italian government. They are giving the 80% of establishment cost, in only in the case they are planted with MSA clones, which are new varieties that are free of illnesses. So thank you so much. I'll wait for some question. I hope everything was clear enough, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pietro. Your English is excellent and definitely a lot better than most of our Italian, I'm sure.
Thank you so much.
So can I invite Jamie to also turn his camera back on? If people have got questions, please put them into the chat. Maybe I can start with a question to Jamie. I'm curious about your background. How did you get into hemp in the first place? And did you think about other crops?
So my background, I actually come from working in contaminated land remediation. I spent 15, 18 years working in that sector, and that was my original touch point with industrial hemp, probably around it's about 8-9 years ago now. I think it probably was, Judith. And it was because hemp's a really good phytoremediator. It can clean up very high levels of different contaminants out the ground, far higher levels than would be phytotoxic and would kill off other plants. So that was my initial research. They actually used it around the to clean up around the radioactive disaster in Chernobyl once, back when there was the nuclear power disaster there. There was lots of radiologically heavy metal contamination in surrounding areas. So they grew lots of hemp there to clean up the soils so it could go back into agricultural productivity. So that was my initial touch point. But when I started looking at the crop, I realized actually there's so much more it can do. Its carbon sequestration potential, its biodiversity benefits, and the fact that you can go into so many different end uses with it compared to lots of other crops. So I don't come from an agricultural background, but that was my initial touch point and why I started looking on hemp. And as soon as I realised it could do a lot more than just clean up some poor quality contaminated land very well, that was really the start of forming the Unite group and moving on from there.
Great, thanks for that. I guess one supplementary question, if I may, then, seeing as I'm in the chair. So it's got lots of end uses, but you also touched on how you tend to choose between a seed variety or a fiber variety. Is that the industry norm, or is there a compromise choice? And then I guess my other query, really, perhaps in relation to that, is what's the fertilization requirement?
So there is what they call dual crops. You either suffer a little bit of yield in one or the other components if you're going for a dual crop, but there are dual crops. What I would say from our experience is dual cropping, you generally get a higher seed head. That can become a little bit problematic with some traditional combine harvesters because hemp has a massive ability to wrap round shafts, and it's the highest tensile strength natural fiber on the planet, which also means when it wraps around stuff, it's pretty hard getting it off. So yeah, having spent many 18-hour days hanging out of harvesters trying to get hemp wrapped around stuff, we learned a lot of what is not to do with it as well as what to do. So there are harvest systems that are perfectly suited to a dual crop, but they're quite an investment. So the systems in there's a John Deere double cut combine there's a few of them in Europe, and there's also a Clarion hemp bull, which is a similar system. So that would allow you to take the biomass from the flowers, the leaves, the seed, and also the straw, and is suited to go for those higher crop varieties. But you need to be really sort of cultivating enough scale to warrant that harvest system. That would be my sort of only real sort of reason that we've generally gone up for one or the other. I think as it emerges, as technologies emerge, and as the crop improvement work that the likes of York are doing as part of the CHCX3 project, all of that work I think will lead to higher yield in dual crops, for instance, or potentially variations that will benefit farmers.
Great, thank you for that.
To the fertilisation point, absolutely. I mean, it does depend on the soils. There is talk that hemp doesn't need fertiliser. I'd say it does, based on a lot of the trials that we've undertaken. If you've got a really nutritious, good quality soil, I mean, we have grown some years without putting any fertiliser down, just going into an existing conventional rotation, but without putting any extra nitrogen down, and we've had successful crops. The one in the picture behind me was grown like that, but we've also seen crops fail. Part of the trials this year, some of the sites failed, and that we think that was due to a lack of fertilizer. So it is very much down to the soil, but yeah, I would say it's not a case that you don't need any. It's probably quite a low input though, sort of 60, 70, 80 kilos a hectare, that sort of number. So certainly not sort of up to the 200 plus that you might see for some cereal crops.
Great, thank you. And then related question in the chat: is it better to plant hemp or poplar on marginal and poor quality land rather than in good quality soil?
I mean, it's a good remediator for poor quality land. So if you want to try and improve some land, because hemp grows very high in its biomass volumes, it means it has quite a big taproot as well and a big root mass. So that's very good at breaking up compact soils, which then can have improvements to the following yields as well. So I think you can improve poor quality land by having hemp in it, but ultimately you will get a lesser yield if you're growing it in poor quality soils compared to better quality soils. So it depends on sort of the approach to a rotation. If you want to bring that poor quality land back into better productivity, then hemp could be a good tool to use for that as well.
Yeah, also for poplar can be the same. But if we think about native poplars such as Populus alba, Populus nigra, they are native living by riverside. So I guess also marginal land is plenty there are plenty of uses that poplars can be planted on marginal land as well. Of course, productivity will change. If we use arable land, we will have such bigger productivity. But yes, we have a lot of customers that are utilizing marginal land where they cannot plant crops like corn or cereals, and they will plant poplar instead.
So Pietro, one thing I just wanted to pick up with you before we go to some of the other questions in the chat is I know scientists get quite bogged down in the importance of definitions and clarity, but what you were referring to as short rotation forestry poplar, we would typically refer to as short rotation coppice.
Yes.
So cut down at ground level, multiple stems, and then harvest every 3 years or so. And then what you're referring to as medium rotation forestry, we'd refer to as short rotation forestry. And it just kind of reminded me that sometimes these we can suffer from not being on the same page when we're talking to people about these crops.
Yeah, I know. Also from the Biomass Showcase event, I understood that we were talking about the same thing, but with different names.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, short rotation forestry will be the shorter one for sure. So 3 to 4 years. And when I talk about medium rotation, is the one with longer poles, 1.75 meters. And they will stay longer in the land, about from 5 to 7 years. Yeah.
Okay, and sort of if we had a willow short rotation coppice in the UK, we'd often talk about potentially applying animal slurries to it as a nitrogen fertilizer. Is that something you do with short rotation coppice poplar?
Sorry, can you please repeat the question, Judith?
So do you apply fertilizer, animal or otherwise?
No, actually we don't suggest our customer to use fertilizers at all, knowing also that poplars are planting in marginal land. It will be also difficult to add the good quantity of fertilizers. And fertilizer can be put on poplar's land, but very early in the season. Otherwise, we will have the not closing bud preparing for the winter time, so it can be more dangerous than helpful for poplars.
That's great, thank you. Jamie, I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the questions in the chat. There's a little bit in there. What is the current position with hemp cultivation and licensing from the UK government?
So so we do need a Home Office license. You apply to the Drugs and Firearms Licensing Unit within the Home Office. It's currently a 3-year license. That's actually going to change. We've been working quite closely with them through the APPG and a few other groups as well, really to look at trying to sort of make some tweaks to the licensing that just ultimately make it easier for farmers. So one of the changes that's come in, and that's going to be from this season, come in 2025 cultivation season, is that you used to have to individually name each field with the grid references for each field that we're going to be growing hemp in on a farm. That's quite time consuming, just administrative wise, putting out the application form. So they've now agreed that we can just put a red line boundary around the farm and you can grow hemp on that farm, any field ultimately in the rotations to suit farmers. So there's flexibility there. And then some of the changes that will come in from 2026 will be that it's going to be a 6-year license rather than the 3-year license. We're also expecting the Home Office to accept the recent recommendations from the ACMD, which is around increasing the THC content in hemp field from 0.2% to 0.3%. That basically would put us on a par with the US, with Canada, with Europe. And also the reason behind that is de-risks it for farmers. It's a compliance limit. THC is a cannabinoid in the crop that is a controlled cannabinoid, if you like. But when we get increased heats like we had a couple of years ago, 240-degree days thrown at it in a row, that can stress the crop, and when the crop stresses, it naturally increases its cannabinoid concentration. So something that's traditionally has been way below the 0.2 threshold could potentially, due to climate change and increased temperatures, actually risk going above that compliance point, which would obviously then have a negative impact on the farm, potentially from a compliance perspective. So that's something that hasn't been agreed for definite yet, but we're hoping will get accepted and rolled out in the 2026 changes.
Okay, so can you explain then, sort of which parts of the hemp plant are controlled? Because there's a question in the chat about, if people wanted to access industrial hemp that were kind of grown on a site, so they didn't have to do the licensing. Are you in a position, which parts of the plant are you allowed to move off site, and which are more complicated?
So we're not allowed to use the flowers. So the buds of the plant, the flowers, where the seeds are obviously maturing within, and then the leaves. Those are the two controlled parts of the plant. So the leaves and the flowers have to get destroyed on the site of production. That's usually undertaken through the retting process, when the straws sitting in the fields gets turned 2 or 3 times. All of that flower and leaf material quite quickly breaks down and degrades. So then when we come to bale the straw, when it's around sort of 15% or below moisture, what we're actually baling is just straw. There's no flowers or leaves in there at all. So that would be one of the ways that you destroy the flower and leaf. The other way is if you're harvesting with a combine, you'd in essence clean your seed out, and all your chaff would get blown back out onto the fields and then would rot back down. So once you've got your seed cleaned, and once you've got straw clean and retted and baled, then both of those are uncontrolled parts of the plant, and you can do anything you want with those. The flowers and the leaves are the controlled part of the bit that we're not allowed to do anything with on site, and we're not even allowed to we are exploring, trying to look at, can we put it into anaerobic digestion, for instance, because that's going to destroy them, but we can draw some benefit from the biomass. At the moment, that's an ongoing conversation. We're not there yet. And to the question around would be options of potentially collaborating, I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free to drop me an email. Happy to support anyone that's looking to come into the sector. We're very open with all the data that we've generated over the last 7-8 years and experience, and I'm happy to share all of that. Our view is we're not going to do it all. It can have a big positive impact if we accelerate and scale the use of hemp. So if we can enable people to get to the point of knowledge we're at now and start their journey from there, that's great. We're happy to do that.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. Question for Pietro. Have you, so clearly you kind of specialize in poplar. Have you seen instances where poplar is being grown in combination with other tree species in, as a biomass crop? So, here's a few rows of short rotation coppice willow, here's a few of short rotation coppice poplar, or do you sort of advise a more of a mono planting?
So yeah, that's a very good question. We are talking now about agroforestry, which is a practice that's becoming very much popular in the last years. With agroforestry, we can do instead of a traditional establishment plantation with 6,000 plants, we can do rows of poplar trees, and between those rows we can plant crops like cereals. And we have actually seen that they both poplars and crops benefits from each other, from windbreaking for poplars to actual shading a bit during hot summertime. So yeah, that's a practice that is becoming very popular also in East Europe, but as well in the UK.
That's interesting. And do you it sounded as if you typically planted a single clone in your plantations. Does that suggest to me that you don't have a huge disease and pest risk?
We have a portfolio of about 20 to 25 different clones. We have made, now it has been actually 30 years that we are working on research, and we are working with some clones in a specific country. Whether we know which illnesses are spreading in that country, and with that being said, we can provide the best clone for that climate. As I mentioned before, AF34 is now leading because it is growing very good and it gets sick quite never. So we are happy with that, but we are still continuing with the research. Once we started the laboratory, our focus was on fungi illnesses. Nowadays, regarding climate change, we are more targeted to find some clones that can resist better to abiotic adversity, like strong wind during summertime or lack of water in summertime again. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pietro. Jamie, a couple more questions for you in the chat. What challenges have you faced with growing industrial hemp in the UK so far? One on pesticides, fertilizers, and harvesting cycles.
So the biggest challenge is probably the lack of primary infrastructure to process the hemp straw into different fractions that you can then take into secondary processing. So that's probably the biggest barrier that we've experienced, and it's the level of investment needed into that infrastructure at the right sizes to make it commercially viable, because certainly for the products we're exploring for construction materials, at the moment, embodied carbon isn't valued in procurement and construction, it's still cost and quality. So for us to get uptake of the bio-based materials, we need to be at the cost comparable point as well, which means doing it at a very high scale. So that's probably the biggest barrier that we've faced for the sectors that we're looking to explore. I would say hemp seed is probably an easier market to enter, because of the infrastructure cost is far lower for the seed processing if you wanted to vertically integrate. And there's lots more seed processing facilities available around the UK than there are hemp processing lines. There's 2 hemp lines up in Yorkshire, so if you're anywhere near Yorkshire, you certainly got potential for growing commercially for fibre up there in collaboration with East Yorkshire Hemp or with Harrison Spinks. Other than that, there's only a pilot line that's operational currently in the rest of the UK for the processing. Pesticides, no, there's no pesticides required for hemp. It actually has, because of the cannabinoids and the terpenes, they act as natural pesticides. So the active compounds that the crop produces in the flowers and the leaves, those also act as natural pesticides as well. Any major fertilizers is very much soil specific. Depends on the indices and the quality of the soil. We've, as I said earlier, we have successfully grown without without fertilizers at all. We've also know of sites which have failed presumably because of a lack of nitrogen on the soils. Hemp doesn't like very heavy wet sort of clays, so very heavy wet ground it struggles to get going with, and very compact areas of ground, the headlands, you always see sites stunting the growth. So I think those are the sort of the indications that we've noticed really. And then how many harvesting cycles? In the UK we only get 1 harvest cycle a year.
Okay, and then another question that in the chat about using hemp as a break crop, then it giving a yield boost to the following crop. How does that compare to other break crops? And then I guess a related question, is that actually any more than an effect than you would expect from any excess nitrogen? So like when we grow hemp here, we test the level of nitrogen in the soil and then we fertilize up to that level of nitrogen, as opposed to blanket application of 50 kilos or something. So is that yield boost to a following crop more than a nitrogen result, would you say?
It's hard to say because we can only go off the anecdotal evidence because we don't own the farms that we grow on. We work in collaboration with partner farmers. We'll license the land for them. We'll cultivate the hemp, harvest the hemp, etc. But we're not generally involved in the regular farming rotations and crop rotations on those farms. So I can only go from the farm, the information I get from the farms. They were very impressed with both the winter wheat and the spring barley that came in at 16 to 18% on both of them, an increase. But I don't know compared to the other alternate break crops that could have been included. Again, I hear a lot about oilseed rape failing as a break crop, and hemp works perfectly as a replacement to OSR in a crop rotation without a lot of the risks associated and all the same potential end products as well.
Great, thank you for that. Pietro, a specific question about the impact of late frost in Denmark and whether you have a genotype that you'd recommend for an area with late frosts.
Yeah, so at the very first start of our research in the laboratory, all clones were tested in the northwest of Italy with a very continental climate, which is different from Denmark. We have now moved on with new clones. There are actually a new one that has been tested in North Europe, which is called Nordic Hybrid 1. NH1, which is performing very good. It has a very high CGR, but at the same time, it opens its bud very late in the springtime, about the last period of May, starting of June, and then it closes quite earlier in autumn. So yes, we have moved on with this new clone, which we are testing in northern climate, and it's giving us good performances.
Okay, does that kind of late start, early finish come with a yield penalty?
Yeah, of course, it will lower a bit the yield of a plantation. We are not talking that much. But again, it will be the same as we grow a plantation in Georgia, let's say, which has a wonderful climate for poplars, so very hot summer with a lot of rain, a lot of sunlight. The yield will be bigger rather than the UK climate or Denmark climate.
Great, thank you for that, Pietro. Question from Julian in the chat, again for Pietro. Are there industrial markets other than biomass for energy available for poplar in the UK that you're aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. If we think about medium rotation forestry, so the target for SRF, it's only wood chips, knowing that they will last 3 years in the field. But if we think about medium rotation forestry, we can start with other products. So medium rotation can opens up a variety of different uses, like pallet production, pellet, OSB board, or even plywood production. So yeah, there are some more valuable product rather than just wood chips that can add value on the plantation. Yes.
Great, thank you for that. So then, if you're, how does that compare then to, so lots of those products that you've described there are currently provided for by thinnings out of standard commercial forestry.
Yeah.
So does poplar actually offer a performance advantage, would you say, for some of those markets?
For sure. If we think about the biggest competitor of poplar, which is birch plantation. So I think that you're not that familiar with birch in the UK, but the biggest plantation of birch in Europe are in Russia and East Europe, and they have a cycle of about 70 years. So that's a very long period of time. they grow 10 out of a poplar. So, and they have pretty much the same wood. So they are both softwood species, and they can be used for the same products as well. So yeah, poplar can offer faster cycle production, and of course the varieties of uses is big.
Yeah, I mean that's really helpful because we're because in the UK, I guess we're quite familiar with birch as a sort of a pioneer species that sort of starts, just arrives in contaminated sites. But yeah, you're right. We don't have it on big forestry rotations. Okay. We're almost at time. So thank you very much to both of the speakers for those insightful presentations. So this webinar will be available on the web, and both Pietro and Jamie's contact details are available if you've got any other burning questions that we didn't manage to address. If you've enjoyed this webinar, you'll be glad to know there's going to be another one before Christmas. It's called Plan Bs, how to turn it all around. And we're actually in absolute keeping with the idea that how to turn it around when something goes wrong. We're actually out of sequence because that webinar was due to be last month and we're actually holding it next month. And that will be Will McAlpine from Rothamsted speaking about what to do if it goes wrong in relation to willow, and Chris Ashman speaking about what to do if it goes a bit wrong in relation to miscanthus crops. Yeah, okay, so just a final plug for our partners in Biomass Connect. Those are the organisations involved. And please do follow us on social media and pass on our stuff. So if you weren't familiar with Biomass Connect and you'd like to follow us, then those are the means for doing so. Finally, a big thank you to Desnes for funding this project. And thanks for attending to all the participants, and look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar. That's all from us.